Welcome back, everybody, to episode 3 of the One to Pass podcast. And yes, this time we finally have video. You get to see the faces of me and our good friend Conor. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Conor. I've only been on the channel once before. I'm excited to be doing this podcast with you.
Yeah, he's a avid player of Vanguard, just like everybody else that's on the channel. And I'm gonna hear his opinions on some stuff. Today's topics are gonna be the new Sentinel PGs, which is interesting. When the order of attack you should have in the game, and knowing when to guard. All right, welcome back. So, we'll start the topic off with new Sentinels. So, as Bushy decided to leak to us, we got brand new PG Sentinels.
A lot of fun. We've already played with them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely like how they help.
So, their new skills now is basically the same as normal PGs, but you only have to discard if you have, 2 or more cards in hand. So, if you only have 2 cards and you have 2 PGs in hand, or 2 free PGs.
It's a lot of fun.
That helps tremendously, and I can tell you that now. Like, it fixed all the problem with guarding. Like, I was upset about the shield values and everything because it's like getting steamrolled. But wow, that made a big difference in playing, especially with some of our videos. Like, you watch the Top Deck Heroes video with Keter and Dark States, you can notice how far those games went just because of the perfect guard.
I've already played a little bit. I did most of my playing with Dragon Empire, but I was able to hold my overdress cards a lot longer because I would be able to use a nullify to protect, where otherwise I'd need 2 to 3 cards to block something.
Mm-hmm.
It helped keep me in there for the late game.
Yeah, and I'm curious on how this is going to translate later, because normally when you were guarding, you had to, try to save your PGs for last for the big attack. And, you'd be guarding and trying to save your hand because you want to have cards, resources for the PG. Now you don't have to worry about that. You can just guard away. You can win the pass, or 5k guard, 5k guard, and then null, but after they draft check with the Vanguard, which helps a lot, honestly. Unless the only time that, even if they hit an over trigger, it's still amazing. You have 2 PGs in hand, that's all you have. You guard the over trigger.
I've actually done exactly that. I like that it is a grade 1. It's the first time I've used a grade 1 Sentinel in a deck and kept it.
I do think, though, that people are going to be upset about that, though, because whenever we had the draw PGs, it added a lot of deck flexibility for people to make things. I think the ride deck's going to mitigate that a little bit, because now that you have the ride deck, you don't have to have 4 copies of the cards that are in your ride deck. You only have to have them. Like, crew is going to help some of the effects, like Zorga, the new stuff that he has. They all gain like 5k and 2k and make good numbers whenever you play in order. So you want to run 4 copies of those in your deck. But say like the overdress deck, the Dragon Empire one, you're probably just going to run them in your ride deck. You're probably never going to run them and like 4 copies of that in your main deck.
I'm never going to keep the priestess. They're there specifically for writing. Mm-hmm. And once I have more stuff to work with, I'm probably going to take the 3 that are in the main deck out of each of the grade 1 and 2.
But then again, it comes to like, that's where you would have had your draw triggers would have filled up the space. Well, now you have possibly more, because that's like, what, 6 cards technically if you take the grade 1s and the 2s out, over the 4 cards that the draw triggers probably provided. And now you get to keep the grade 1 draws or whatever.
The grade 1 PGs.
Grade 1 PGs, yes.
I do enjoy that they're grade 1s. I've come into Vanguard and out of it for work for different reasons, and every time I've come back, guarding has changed. I left and then came in, and then draw PGs existed, and suddenly the grade 1s were out of my deck so that I could use the draws. And then I came back, and there were crit PGs for the high shield value, and I just saw no disadvantage to running them. Everything I've ever played runs at least 4 crit.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people are going to notice real quick as the sets progress, is like you're not locked into having to run draw triggers in your deck now to the perfect guard.
I've been thinking exactly that. Probably not going to run them in Dragon Empire.
Because now you can run flexibility over, I want to run fronts, I want to run crits, so on and so forth. I mean, you can still run draws if you want them, they're there, but there's still the same old regular draws with 5k and 5k shield.
I do also like that as grade 1s, they're grade 1s worth guarding with, because, again, the 5k shield value on normal grade 1s hits guarding a little bit harder.
One more thing I want to talk about with these Sentinels before we move on to the next subject is the art.
They all look fantastic.
So the fun thing about these, and I noticed this with the over triggers, is that if you looked back at the premium collections, the progenitor dragons,
Yeah.
they were very much a mix, like the Xeroths, of all the nations into one. They kind of encompassed everything in that nation into one unit. And I feel like these are very, very similar. Not so much for Dragon Empire, because, well, I guess if you count the stash around it is the ninja aspect.
Yeah, it gets a little bit of it.
But the others definitely feel that. Like Dark Zones definitely feels like an amalgamation of everything in there. Brandgate definitely feels like that. It looks a lot like the Progenitor, actually, when we got it.
Oh,
And,
yes, it does.
the Horse Dragon definitely is Keter Sanctuary.
It's at home.
And there's definitely flower aspects. There's definitely like an animal aspect to the Stoicheia. So I feel like that fits too. But it definitely has like that progenitor look to these.
It feels like it'll fit in any deck, no matter how you try to play that nation.
Well, yeah. So that was the Sentinels. So next subject we're going to talk about is order of attack. So I feel like we should cover some topics about mechanics of the game and styles of the game, because some players, like newer players, don't know, hey, what order of attack should I go with? Is it better to do this or to do this, guarding and so forth? So I'm going to cover a few things like that. We'll start with the order of attack. So what do you feel is the best order of attack if you have just 3 units, your Vanguard and 2 rear guards?
If we're counting out all effects from the front, from anything that's on the field right now, most people are excited to hit that drive check, because especially at grade 3, having twin drive changes everything. It can make your attack suddenly hit. So I know a lot of people go with the Vanguard first. That's lost me many games.
Yeah, most of the time, going Vanguard first is never the best way to go. Because, I mean, yes, it's a safe route because you can always just throw your triggers on the rear guard. But most of the time, you want a power scale, because there's not a guarantee that you're going to rip a trigger. And then what happens when your opponent rips a defensive trigger? Now your rear guards that you were going to swing with probably can't attack. But if you were to swing with them first, they had an opportunity, and then you have an opportunity with the Vanguard to swing the drive check. So my opinion is, if you go rear guard, Vanguard, rear guard, that's the better way, because it gives you a good balance of when the swings. Now, there is, exceptions to this. And exceptions would be in premium if you're running stand triggers.
Yeah.
Stand triggers, at that point, you definitely go rear guards first. Because your Vanguard can stand triggers and stand the rear guards. If you have a restanding Vanguard, then at that point, I would go Vanguard first.
This is entirely like Dragon Empire right now wants to swing with Vanguard first, because you're going to power up overdrive units.
Yes.
So that's another exception. But for the most part, when I build a field, I go left to right, with left being my weakest, then Vanguard, then right being my highest rear guard row.
Because a lot of people that play Vanguard Zero already know about this, but power scaling helps a lot, because you can't always bank on your opponent never hitting a defensive trigger. There's always the possibility of your opponent hitting a defensive trigger. Excuse me. And because of that, you got to think, well, will this hit? Well, I mean, that's the best way to put it, is this going to hit if they hit a defensive trigger? If no, okay, then I should probably swing with this first.
That's something I've been picking back up, especially with overdress. I've learned the over trigger will ruin turns.
And that's another weird one, because now that we have over triggers in the game, if you know you're only going to have 3 attacks, that's where things get a little wonky, because people are probably going to be banking on, hey, there's still there's a good opportunity for me to hit the over trigger. It's still in the deck. Well, what if I swing with Vanguard first? Because then I can just give the 2 rear guards 100 million, and they can hit no matter what, as long as they don't have a perfect guard. So there gives that. And then if you go to the rear guard, Vanguard, rear guard centric, and you drive check it, well, cool. You can't give the other rear guard 100 million, so you're just going to give it to the Vanguard, and it's already swinging. So if it got PG, then it was just a waste of the power. And then the other 100 million, we're talking about the Star Tech over trigger, by the way, not the other ones, because we have no idea what the other ones might bring. But just that alone, it's like, okay, well, I just wasted the effect because it's already got PG'd, and there's only one rear guard that can get the 100 million.
It's definitely a waste. But I was actually thinking about it as a guarding card in hand, because it is effectively a PG unless they hit their overtrigger when you block with it. Having that much shield value is enough to stop
I don't know.
a lot.
You say that, but let's say you're going against Dragon Empire, right? They overdress, they swing with Vanguard, they hit their overtrigger,
You're dead.
and they restand, and they do the effect again. So there's already 20 on top of the plus 10, and then they're already a base of 10, so there's already 40, not including any triggers or other effects that are boosting it. They might get over that overtrigger.
They might, and then you have to consider in that case they're also getting 2 more drive checks. You're blocking for a lot of potential more than you're blocking for the solid numbers, which is where a lot of entering players have trouble. They're not just blocking for the immediate number.
That's a good segue, though, to our other topic, knowing when to guard. I feel like this is a really, really big topic that a lot of newer players miss a lot and don't know or not experienced with, is knowing when to take a hit and when not to take a hit. Because early in the game, it's obvious, you can take some hits. But there's a point where you want to say stop, and there's a point when you want to say, okay, I want some more damage because I need resources. So, throwing it to you, when would you say is a good time to guard and a good time not to guard?
I personally very rarely guard on the first attack. The only time I've ever done it is when someone tried to board rush me. And I'll still take 2 damage from it because there's no point not to. I do find that if you eat too much damage in the early game, you are much more pressured late game because you're never going to have the hand size needed to block. So I usually find I do my best when I'm taking at least 1 damage every turn. It gives me the chance for something to block with on a trigger, but I'm not relying on it. But I'm also blocking. I usually find myself blocking the lowest number because it's the easiest to block. I recognize it's not always the best move.
In my opinion, there's no easy way to gauge. There's not like a safety rule. I personally have a rule of never put myself past 3 damage before they get the grade 3, because they could easily just say double crit you right then and you're done if they do that. So I always try to leave myself 2-3 max damage before I get to grade 3. Depending on the deck I'm doing, though, if it's not very counterblast intensive, Stoic is a good option. Stoic has only thing it really needs to counterblast is the Vanguard. You can have other skills in Rearguard, but they're optional. But you always want to have yourself at least 1 counterblast. So before you get to grade 3, you can leave yourself at 2, and that guarantees you at least 2 of Magnolia skills. But you really don't want to put yourself too high because, say you're going against Dark States, and you put yourself at 3, and they decide to final rush you. And then you're looking out 5 attacks, and depending on your situation, you may or may not have the hand to guard all of it, especially if they Persona Ride.
Yeah, Persona Ride definitely changes. It actually has changed when I choose to guard in a turn when they Persona Ride too.
But I feel like if you're gonna guard though, especially in the late game, this I feel like this is key. Always guard small attacks, because you're gonna use less resources from your hand. If you were to say this little guy here swinging for, I'm a 13k Vanguard, is swinging for 14. Okay, so I could let that hit, but what happens when the other attacks are bigger and I don't have the shield? Always guard what you can, but at the same time, don't overguard. Don't leave yourself defenseless on the next turn, if that makes sense. Unless it's absolutely dire and you're at 5 damage, at that point you're like, oh yeah, I know I'm going to die right here. I should probably guard everything.
Yep. I find new players. I have friends who are slowly getting into Vanguard, so that's a lot of fun playing with them. But I find them trying to block every attack, which it's not smart.
And that's the one thing I noticed about new players that pick up the game, straight out of the gate. They have the tendency to feel like guarding everything, they're gonna die if they take damage. So they have the mentality of guarding everything. No. Counterblast is a resource in the game, and it is okay to take some damage. Just don't take a lot. Don't know when to stop. I feel like being at 2 damage before grade 3 is a good start, and taking only 1 damage past that every turn is a good start after that, because it gives you wiggle room unless you need more effects that require counterblast intense.
It also gives you the chance to recover from if your opponent happens to double crit, especially on their first grade 3. They just gave you 2 more counterblasts is all they really did. They didn't push you for the game.
Exactly. Also, keep in mind that certain decks also really won't counterblast. Keter Sanctuary's Order is a good example. If you have it in hand, it's a good idea to leave yourself at least with 2 open CB when it comes to your turn, because it's probably going to plus you at least 1 card to your hand because it replaces itself and draws you a card, and it gives a unit +5, so it gives you resources to work with. So it can return it. It can turn into a unit or a shield, and the card you draw can also turn into a unit or a shield. You don't have to beat the Order, which is a dead card in your hand. So at that point, you want to give yourself at least 2 CB. So there are moments where you're like, okay, then I need to take the damage. So again, it kind of weighs on your deck. But on an average roll, I feel like don't guard immediately in the game. It's okay to say, I'm going to take a hit. Unless your opponent's like grade 1 rushing you. But then at that point, your dynamic changes a bit. You could take some of this damage and you can guard some of it. At that point, I would just say go to the same mentality you would if you're at a grade 3. Throw down the pokes, guard them easy, and then take the Vanguard because they're going to probably drive track a crit. But if you guard the rest of the rear guards, they're throwing down the whole board. Like, cool, well, you only took 2 damage from all this. They have no hand. Now you can just push back harder in the follow up.
I find your 2 damage is good. I find that counterblast heavy decks will want to stop at 3 before your opponent hits grade 3 because you're trying to buy yourself turns at that point. But 2 or 3 is a good number to sit at. I usually tell anyone who comes into the game to try to sit at 3 because it takes less pressure off of guarding, lets them focus more on playing their deck.
Yeah, I can see that. So I'm going to throw a wild card into this. So we're talking about guarding and everything, but there is a dynamic now in the game, especially with overdress, because they've changed a lot, that puts a twist on this. Blitz orders. Blitz orders are back, and some of you that played V-Series, if you have, you already know what I'm talking about. We have more Blitz orders that are like a quick ticket.
Yeah.
But for new players, they're going to say, well, what is this? Well, it's an order that you can use defensively like a shield. You can use it on your opponent's turns. And a good one is, the only one we have right now is Stoicheia. I keep messing up. Stoicheia.
Oh, that's how that's pronounced?
Stoicheia. So Stoicheia is it gets +5, and then if you hit the condition, it gets +15 if you have 3 or 1 to back row.
Yeah, that's big.
So that makes a difference because, depending on how you play your game, could make you can have bigger shields. So it can impact the way you guard, and also the way your opponent plays can also impact your guard. If you're playing against Dragon Empire, they can pop one of your back rows and shut down your guard. That drops it from 15 down to 5. So don't rely on those. Keep in mind the same mentality, but at the same time, also play around with stuff like that. Like if you know that, your opponent's never, unless you drive check it, your opponent's probably never going to know or use a skill that you have that in your hand. They can assume, but they're not going to just waste resources just to kill something just because, their assumption you have it.
Yeah, if I were to start assuming you have that in hand to guard with every turn, I'm suddenly putting a lot more resources into hitting things that I'm over-calculating, and that will cost me resources almost every single time.
But since we're talking about blitz orders, what do you think could be the possibility of other blitz orders? You're going to get more blitz orders, obviously.
Yeah,
but
somewhere down the road.
How far do you think they're going to go?
That's hard to predict. I like the blitz order we currently have because it's a level of opponent interaction. But I think, and how is it pronounced? Stoicheia? Stoicheia. I think it's probably the best for its blitz order because that blitz order plays to the way every set currently we know for it wants to play. It wants to have a full field.
Yes.
That would be a lot harder to predict with something with overdress from Dragon Empire. Now, unless it gave power to your overdressed units to help protect your rear guards, which are the real running engine of Dragon Empire, that's a little different. Because if during your turn my overdress gets plus 10k, you're not going to rear guard swing at it anymore. Not really.
So I know there are people out there that are thinking about this, but orders have skills. It doesn't have to be power. They have skills. Who's to say that Brentgate won't get an blitz order, that says imprison a card when your opponent's attacking. Or who's to say Dragon Empire won't get a Blitz order that retires in a rear guard?
That's very true. It could. It would definitely be a back row. We're not going to have them just
No.
deleting something that
Well,
swinging.
we had Denial Griffin. So it
Fair.
could be something like a Denial Griffin on an order.
We could definitely see it. It would be a game changer. It would definitely immediately push up a deck into a higher tier because of the ability to just not only block an attack but stop an attack.
Yeah. Who's to say, like, oh, cool, you ripped 100 million? That's cool. I'm just going to Blitz order this and kill it.
Be gone. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. I don't think we'll immediately get it, but down the road, I definitely think that would be
And obviously, it's going to have a cost to it, too. It's probably
Oh,
like
definitely.
Counterblast 2 or something. Or
Something
called-
big.
Yeah. It's not going to just be like, play this card like Stoic is. Stoic is pretty good, but at the same time, it's like, okay, it's just like it would be a normal shield
yeah.
in your hand.
I think Counterblast 2 would probably be a good cost on that. It's late enough in the game. If you have 2 Counterblast and you need to delete an attack, you're probably already losing. That's when you need it.
But I can definitely see something like Brent Gate for the Imprisoned deck getting. But yeah, so I feel like there could definitely be more Blitz orders. That'd be interesting dynamic though,
We'll definitely see them.
because Blitz orders is definitely going to be a big part for Stoicheia for sure. Because that we got what's his name, Zorga. He works on normal orders, not Blitz orders. So Blitz orders are honestly a little bit dead in his deck. Like, yes, your rear guards get effects when you play orders, but his ability, you can only Alchemagic with normal orders. So,
That helps, yeah.
so as we can see, a lot of these effects are very, very like prominent on these orders, and I like how Bushiroad is pushing orders now. Like back in V series, orders were just there. You had one Blitz order, and then you had all these generic orders that are like, why would I even play this? The book was probably the one that got the most use, or the unlock one that occasionally got used, but they rarely got used because they were so overcosted or so niche that you'd almost never play them. But now we're seeing like these orders that are like, ooh, no, the whole deck revolves around these orders, which is nice because it gives a big change because now you're not stuck on units. You're stuck on playing other things. You're thinking. Like now we have field spells technically. Now we have instants and sorceries like magic now in the game. And it's making you like think like, well, what's a good ratio? Because some decks may not want to play a lot of units, but some decks might want to play a lot of units.
I find, specifically working with Dragon Empires, I find it helps with consistency, but it doesn't do just one thing. I do get, my overdress engine for the deck back, but I also power something else up. It does 2 things at once, which is definitely a nice direction for it. I find I was concerned, I guess, with Cater's order. It's definitely cost intensive, but it helps. It does what it's supposed to. It puts stuff where it needs to be.
Yes, and the way I told Philip about this card, this is how I looked at it, because he's like, he didn't think of it as a great card, and I thought it was an amazing card. You know why? Because it takes up a grade 3 slot in your deck that's not an actual grade 3, and it replaces itself with things that could not be grade 3s to help you survive, because the deck is so flooded with grade 3s, and it wants a lot of grade 3s.
It has a lot of potential. Yeah, I can see what you mean.
Because if you think about it, like, ooh, well, this could be a grade 3 unit. Well, what's that grade 3 going to unit do in your hand? It's just dead, unless you play it on the board. But you don't have like extra slots. You only have 5 slots.
Yeah.
You're just going to waste out your entire hand because otherwise you'd have no hand to guard with in general. Right? But if you use the order, it counts as the grade 3. But it itself can not only replace itself but draw you a card, and be either shield or more units that you could use to benefit your grade 3s.
Okay.
So
yeah.
it's not just a dead card in your hand.
I agree. I did hit it as a grade 3 for my write-up chain, so I was able to draw off of it.
Yes.
I did then immediately play it. I did hit 2 grade 3s with it, mind you, but in the off chance that was a perfect guard in something else that I could play, it has great defensive potential.
Because if you think about it, by the time you can play it, it's only when you're in grade 3. And by that point, you want 3 grade 3s in your hand for the grade 2 skill.
Correct, so you can draw an additional card.
Exactly. So it and 2 other grade 3s are already going to be your deck. The likelihood of drawing one to more grade 3s is rare. It can happen, but it's less likely. So the fact that it's probably going to replace itself with a card with shield is better than it just being a dead grade 3. And then it could also plus you another card that has shield, not just it replacing itself.
It's very interesting. As I think about it, there's currently not much in the way of searching in overdress, but orders do play a big enough role in some decks that you could one day see cards that search out orders.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like what's his name? Zorga.
Yeah.
Is so heavily reliant on normal orders that I can easily see a card to say, hey, I'm going to search for an order.
Yeah, exactly. And if you need to recover, then I could even see Dragon Empire getting something that gets in their order back so that they can keep playing off of their overdress, because that's always a constant target.
And then we still have enough to see if we're gonna might get even more set orders. We talked about this last episode, but Brandgate just isn't the only one that can just use the order zone.
Yeah, it's an actual zone on the field, so we could see a lot more permanent orders on the field.
Like, I love the direction they're going with this, but I'm just curious with Blitz orders because a lot of people miss the aspect of interaction between in Vanguard back in G. They miss having G guards that interacted with your opponent's board and disrupting, because the one thing about Vanguard, yes, it's back and forth, but a lot of players also don't like being able to say, well, I have no control over this. Like, I don't like being able to say, well, they're just going to do it anyways, and there's nothing I can do about it. The good thing about Blitz orders is it could add back the same aspect of G, where it's like, cool, I can lock your back row, or I can retire your rear guard, or I can interact with your board some way, so that way I'm not just dying. I have a say in what happens.
It disrupts my opponent's turn directly instead of I'm just throwing my hand at
It
you.
also makes skill for the other player because, you have to think, well, do they have something like this a Blitz order that could affect my turn if I try to do all this? I have, say the retire one, right?
Yeah.
You're playing Stoic A, right? They, that's a good example. They swing with their rear guards in the back row, right?
Yes.
Cool. Well, I can pop that one in the back row with the with the Blitz order, right? Before they attack with the end of the Vanguard attack. Well, cool. Now they don't have that really good target they were going to use to attack from the back row because it had a skill on the back row.
It's very interesting. And again, as you mentioned it, with Dragon Empire, let's say I do swing and retire a rear guard. If you used an order to, specifically the one we already have, to buff your field, that buff goes back down. I can control how much you're guarding with in a situation like that.
And the really, really good part, I think Brandgate can really benefit from this if it gets an Imprison Blitz order, for the simple fact that your opponent's probably saying, oh, okay, cool, well, they've wasted out a lot of their resources. They have a Soul Blast, but they can't Counterblast to keep taking my stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to pay all their resources. I'm going to take this so you have nothing. You have one Counterblast. You can't get the 3, right?
Yeah.
I attack. I'm going to Blitz order, Soul Blast one, Imprison one of your back rows. Now I have one ready, so all I have to do is CB one to get there.
Yeah, that's not just opponent interaction. That's you setting up your turn on your opponent's turn.
And it's disruption.
Yeah, it's everything.
So I can see them easily doing stuff like this in the main set.
Yeah, I can too. That would be very powerful. It would also be enough to add variety to decks so that you're not just playing the exact same thing.
Exactly. So that's why I'm interested to see what they do with Blitz orders, because depending on how they treat them, it could either be just, okay, cool, they're just like, here's some shield, or they can be really good disruption effects that can interact with your decks and make them way better.
Player interaction has definitely helped. It was definitely a lot of fun to play when I was thinking, how is my opponent going to prepare for me with the new order?
But yeah, that's all the topics for today's episode. Hopefully you guys like this. If you did, subscribe, like, share this video with you guys. That way more people can see this podcast and more people can listen to us talk about gibberish and Vanguard. But with that, this is the end of the episode, and we'll see you guys next week. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.